The galactic concordance stretched across half the known universe. 7,000 different species called it home. Some looked like clouds of gas that could think. Others were made of living metal. A few existed in dimensions humans couldn't even see properly. They had all joined together 3 million years ago to create something perfect. A civilization where every wrong was remembered and every debt was paid. At the center of this massive empire sat the judgment engines. These machines were bigger than planets. They existed partly in normal space and partly in places where time moved differently. Their only job was to remember everything bad that ever happened between species and make sure everyone paid for their mistakes. If the collective stole minerals from space 200,000 years ago, the engines remembered. If the Plex Dominion accidentally killed 3 explorers in a docking accident, the engines calculated exactly how much the Plex owed. The system worked perfectly for millions of years. Every species in the concordance had a rank. They stood at the very top. They were beings made of thinking crystal, so advanced they could bend reality with their minds. They ranked first not just because they were smart, but because everyone owed them debts. Centuries and centuries of accumulated favors and unpaid crimes had stacked up in their favor. At the bottom of the rankings were species that had barely learned to split atoms. In the middle were thousands of civilizations of every type imaginable, all connected by an invisible web of who owed what to whom. When humanity finally developed faster-than-light travel and knocked on the Concordance's door, nobody paid much attention. The human ships were decent but nothing special. Their weapons worked but weren't impressive. Their computers could think fast, but hundreds of species had better ones. The Concordance's evaluation committee looked at humanity's technology, looked at their single colonized solar system, and filed them away at rank 4,872 out of 7,000. Ambassador Maria Santos didn't care about the ranking. She was just excited to meet aliens. In the first month, she and her team visited 12 different species. They traded stories, exchanged art, and started learning how the concordance actually worked. That's when they discovered the engines. Maria stood in the viewing chamber of Judgment Engine 7, one of 50 such machines scattered across the galaxy. The chamber was the size of a football stadium. The walls were made of something that looked like flowing silver. In the center, a column of blue light stretched from floor to ceiling, so bright it hurt to look at directly. "This is where all debts are recorded," said the diplomat assigned to guide the human delegation. His body looked like a tall sculpture made of purple crystal that glowed from within. When he spoke, his voice seemed to come from inside Maria's head. "Every wrong that one species commits against another is logged here. The engines calculate fair compensation." Maria watched as streams of data flowed through the blue light. She could see disputes from yesterday and crimes from 10,000 years ago, all weighted and measured and waiting for payment. "It's impressive," she said carefully, "but doesn't it ever end? Don't people ever just let things go?" The crystal being flickered with confusion. "Let things go? You mean forget? No, that would be unjust. If they damage a human ship, you are owed compensation. The engines remember this. In 50 years or 500 years, the debt will be paid." "What if we don't want them to pay?" Maria asked. His glow dimmed. He turned to face her directly. "I don't understand the question." Over the next 3 weeks, Maria and her team reviewed all the debts that involved humanity. In their short time in space, humans had already accumulated a list. They had crashed into a human science station, killing 2 researchers. The Plex Dominion had seized a human cargo ship by mistake, taking 12 hours to return it. A species called the had insulted human ambassadors in a public forum, causing what the engines calculated as reputational damage. The engines had calculated that humanity was owed 3 years of labor, 1 Plex military vessel, and a formal apology ceremony from that would take place over 6 months. Maria called a meeting with the Concordance Diplomatic Council. 200 species sent representatives. Most appeared via hologram. Attended in person, curious about what the new species wanted. "We've reviewed our debt records," Maria announced to the assembled aliens. "We'd like to clear them." "Of course," said a representative, a creature that looked like a floating jellyfish made of light. "The payment is scheduled to begin in—" "No," Maria interrupted. "We'd like to clear them by forgiving them. We don't want them to pay us. We don't want the Plex ship. We're not angry at the—" The chamber went silent. 200 different species, with 200 different ways of thinking, all struggled with the same confusion. "Forgiving," said slowly. "This word translated strangely. You mean you wish to reduce the payment?" "We mean we wish to eliminate it entirely," Maria explained. "What they did was an accident. They didn't mean to hurt anyone. We don't want them to suffer for it. So we're forgiving them. We're letting it go." A delegate, part of a hive mind that spoke with one voice from 1,000 bodies, chimed in. "But the engines have already calculated the debt. The mathematics are perfect. 2 humans died. This has a value. The value must be paid." "Does it?" Maria pulled up her. "Humanity has been killing each other for thousands of years. Wars, murders, accidents, all kinds of death. If we demanded payment for every life lost, we'd all be indebted to each other forever. Instead, we learned something. We learned that holding onto every hurt makes it impossible to move forward." The council erupted in debate. Some species thought humanity was trying to trick everyone somehow. Others thought humans were simply too primitive to understand the sophisticated system the Concordance had built. A few wondered if this was some kind of strange religious ritual. Remained quiet, processing. Finally, he spoke. "You may, of course, decline payment if you wish, but I must ask, what benefit do you gain from this forgiveness?" Maria smiled. "Peace of mind, freedom, the ability to start fresh. We don't have to think about what they owe us anymore. They don't have to feel guilty. We can just be friends." "Illogical," said the. "You lose leverage, you lose value, you gain nothing concrete." "We gain something better than concrete," Maria said. "We gain possibility." The Concordance approved humanity's request. It was strange, but not illegal. The engines were instructed to delete all debts owed to humanity. The 3 years of labor vanished. The Plex vessel remained in Plex hands. They never had to perform their apology ceremony. The deletion took place at midnight, Concordance Standard Time. Maria was asleep in her quarters when it happened. She didn't see the judgment engines begin to shudder. She didn't hear the alarms that started blaring in maintenance stations across 50 facilities. She woke to frantic knocking on her door. Stood outside, his crystal body flickering with colors she'd never seen before. Behind him were a dozen other species ambassadors, all looking panicked. "What did you do?" His mental voice was sharp, almost painful. "What did you do to the engines?" Maria followed them to the nearest viewing chamber. The blue column of light that showed debts and calculations was flickering. Numbers appeared and disappeared. Species owed debts and then didn't. Crimes showed as balanced and unbalanced at the same time. "We deleted your debts as requested," a technician explained, its light pulsing irregularly. "But the system is designed to maintain perfect mathematical balance. When we removed the debt to humanity, it created a null value. They had committed their offense because they were rushing to pay a debt to the Plex. The Plex were demanding fast payment because they were demanding payment from them. Your forgiveness removed one link in a chain of causation that stretches back 3 million years." Maria watched the screens fill with error messages. "So what happens now?" "We don't know," admitted. His glow was almost white now, a sign of extreme stress. "The engines have never experienced forgiveness before. They don't know how to calculate it. The math doesn't work. You can't subtract justice from justice. You can't erase a debt without payment." All across the galaxy, the other 49 judgment engines were experiencing the same crisis. The perfect system that had maintained peace for millions of years was crashing, and it was all because one species had decided to forgive. In her quarters later that night, Maria looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, 7,000 civilizations were panicking. She should probably feel guilty. Instead, she felt hopeful. Maybe, just maybe, the galaxy was about to learn something new. The Concordance Emergency Council met in person for the first time in 12,000 years. When problems could usually be solved by perfect mathematical calculation, there was no need for debate. But now the engines were failing, and no amount of calculation could fix them. The council chamber was a sphere 1 kilometer across, floating in neutral space. Each of the 7,000 species had a representative there. Some sat in chairs, others floated. A few existed as projections or sounds or smells, depending on how they perceived reality. Humanity's delegation was just 3 people: Maria Santos, Dr. James Wu, a psychologist specializing in conflict resolution, and Captain Sarah, a military historian. They sat in simple chairs in a section reserved for lower-ranked species, surrounded by civilizations that barely knew humans existed. At the center of the sphere floated the High Council. 50 crystal beings arranged in a geometric pattern was among them. His color was still pale with stress. "We are here because the impossible has occurred," announced, his mental voice reaching every being in the chamber. "The judgment engines are failing. They cannot process the concept of forgiveness. They cannot calculate null values. If we do not fix this, 3 million years of recorded history will be lost. Every debt will vanish. Chaos will return to the galaxy." A roar of concern echoed through the chamber. Species shouted in languages humans couldn't hear and probably couldn't survive hearing. "There is a solution," said the Prime, its light pulsing steadily. "We restore the debts. We force the humans to accept what they are owed. The engines will stabilize." "No." Everyone turned to look at Maria. She stood up slowly, aware that 6,999 species were now focused on her. "If you force us to accept debts, we'll just forgive them again," she said clearly. "You can't make someone hold a grudge. That's not how grudges work." "Then you will destroy us all," hissed a speaker. "Your primitive emotional response will shatter galactic civilization." Dr. Wu stood up next to Maria. "Actually, forgiveness isn't primitive. It's incredibly advanced. It might be the most advanced technology humanity ever developed." Laughter echoed through the chamber, not friendly laughter, the kind of laughter that said the speaker had made a fool of themselves. "Forgiveness isn't technology," said gently, as if explaining to a child. "Technology is ships and computers and the engines. Technology can be measured." "Forgiveness can be measured," Wu insisted. He pulled out a holographic display. "We've been studying this for thousands of years. Look." The display showed Earth. Specifically, it showed humanity's bloodiest century, from 1900 to 2000. Wu played videos of wars, genocides, and atrocities that made several species in the chamber physically recoil. 100 million dead in our wars," Wu said quietly. "Populations enslaved, cities destroyed, families shattered. According to your engines, the debts from this century alone should have trapped humanity in eternal revenge cycles. Germany owed everyone. Russia owed Germany. Japan owed China. America owed Vietnam. The Middle East, Africa, South America, all locked in chains of payback that should never end." He changed the display to show Earth in 2200. "But we're still here. One world, one government, no wars for 150 years. How?" "You evolved past violence," suggested a Plex observer. "You matured as a species." "No," Captain spoke up. "We still have violence, we still have crime, we still hurt each other, but we stopped letting past hurts control our future. We developed a technology for breaking revenge cycles." She brought up a new set of data, Truth and Reconciliation Commissions. "We used them in South Africa, Rwanda, South America, and dozens of other places. The process is simple. Acknowledge the harm, let victims speak their truth. hold perpetrators accountable, and then make a choice. The choice to forgive. That's not technology, protested. That's just talking. Your engines are just calculating, Maria countered. But you call them technology because they do something useful. Forgiveness does something useful too. It breaks infinite loops. It allows systems to reset. Without it, humanity would still be fighting wars that started 1,000 years ago. The High Council pulsed with colors, communicating among themselves in ways humans couldn't perceive. Finally, spoke for all of them. Even if we accept your premise that forgiveness is a technology, we cannot use it. We have perfect memory. We can recall every slight, every theft, every broken promise from 3 million years ago with exact precision. We remember the mining our asteroids without permission 847,000 years ago. We remember every moment of it. We cannot simply choose to let it go. Can't you? Dr. Wu moved to the center of the chamber. You remember it, fine, but are you still experiencing it? Is it still happening right now? No, but... Then it's a memory, not current reality. And memories can't hurt you unless you let them. That's the technology, learning to separate remembering from reliving. You can keep the memory for historical purposes, for learning, for understanding. You just stop letting it control your present. The prime dimmed and brightened in thought. If we forgive the for exploiting us, we lose our leverage. They owe us. That debt keeps them from doing it again. Does it? Captain pulled up the Concordance's own data. The engines show that they have exploited you 14 separate times across history. Each time, they paid their debt. Then they did it again. The debt system doesn't prevent harm. It just ensures harm gets paid for after it happens. But forgiveness combined with changed behavior actually stops the cycle. The council erupted in argument again. Species began calculating what they would lose if they forgave the debts owed to them. They would lose their position at the top of the hierarchy. They would lose centuries of accumulated leverage. Everyone would lose the safety net of knowing that wrongs against them would be balanced. But they would also be free. A small voice chimed in, barely audible. It came from a species called the ranked 6,892 out of 7,000. They were small, caterpillar-like beings who mostly kept to themselves. We will try, the representative said. The Plex Dominion destroyed one of our colony ships 3,000 years ago. We have been owed compensation ever since. The engines say we should receive 2 Plex worlds. We forgive this debt. Silence fell over the chamber. Why? Asked. Because we are tired, the said simply. We have spent 3,000 years being angry. We would like to spend the next 3,000 years being free. If the humans say this is possible, we will try. Another voice joined in, this time from the We forgive the debts owed to us by the hives. The biological contamination was an accident. We should have let it go ago. One by one, species began to speak. Not all of them, not even most of them, but enough. They forgave debts that had hung over them for thousands of years. They released grudges they had carried across galaxies. And in 50 locations across space, the judgment engines began to change. The error messages slowed. The flickering stabilized. The engine stopped trying to calculate null values and started calculating something new. The probability of cooperation when debts were released. The likelihood of peace when revenge cycles were broken. Maria watched the readings with growing hope. They're adapting, she said to Dr. Wu. The engines are learning that forgiveness isn't an error, it's a feature. But not everyone was convinced. The High Council glowed with agitation. They had built their entire civilization on being the most wronged, the most owed. If forgiveness spread, they would lose everything. Descended from his position at the center of the sphere. He floated in front of Maria, his crystalline form dimmer than she had ever seen it. You have given the galaxy a gift, he said quietly, so only the humans could hear. But you have taken something from us. We were mighty because we were owed. If we forgive, what are we? Maria stood to meet him at eye level. I don't know, she said honestly. But maybe you could find out who you are when you're not defined by what others owe you. Maybe you could be mighty because of what you choose to do, not because of what was done to you. Flickered through colors Maria had no names for. Then, slowly, he began to glow with a warm, golden light. It will take time, he said. We do nothing quickly, but perhaps we will try. The council session ended without a final decision. Species returned to their homes to debate and discuss. The judgment engines continued to evolve, guided by each new act of forgiveness. The concordance hung in a strange balance, caught between 3 million years of perfect justice and the possibility of something new. In her quarters, Maria looked out at the stars again. The galaxy hadn't changed overnight, but for the first time in 3 million years, it had changed direction. That was enough for now. 5 years passed. In that time, the galaxy transformed in ways no one had predicted. The change started slowly. The who had forgiven the Plex Dominion began direct trade talks with them. Without the weight of ancient debt hanging over every negotiation, they completed in 6 months what would have taken decades under the old system. Other species watched and began their own experiments with forgiveness. Dr. James Wu became the most requested diplomat in the Concordance. He traveled from world to world, teaching the technology of forgiveness. Some species learned quickly, others struggled. The hardest cases were always the same: civilizations that had built their entire identity around being wronged. Wu spent 2 years working directly with the. He lived on their crystal, a planet where thinking beings grew like trees and communicated through light and resonance. At first, they treated him like a curiosity. How could a being who lived less than a century teach anything to beings who had existed for millions of years? But Wu was patient. He started with. They met in a garden of crystal formations, where young grew in geometric patterns, had been struggling. 5 years after humans introduced forgiveness, he still couldn't let go of the ancient mining dispute with the. He could replay the memory perfectly. Ships stripping asteroids that belonged to the, stealing minerals worth fortunes. I can see it, explained to Wu, his light pulsing with old anger. Every detail. The exact tonnage taken. The precise time it occurred. 847,612 years ago. How can I forgive something I remember so clearly? Wu sat on a rock, looking small next to the towering crystal being. Can you remember what you had for breakfast 800,000 years ago? Flickered with confusion. Yes, I had synthesized minerals grade 4 with. Okay, different question, Wu interrupted gently. Are you still hungry from that breakfast? Of course not. Then the memory exists, but it's not affecting you now. It's not happening to you now. Wu picked up a small crystal shard from the ground. This memory of the stealing from you. When you replay it, you feel angry, right? Yes. But the anger isn't coming from 800,000 years ago. That anger is gone. This anger is new. You're creating it fresh every time you remember. You're choosing to feel it. Light dimmed as he processed this. I don't understand. The crime occurred. They were wrong. How can I choose not to be angry about a real thing? Wu turned the crystal shard over in his hands. The crime was real. The memory is real, but you can remember it without recreating the emotion. Watch. He pulled out a small photo, worn and faded. This is my daughter. She died in a shuttle accident when she was 16. A maintenance error. Someone forgot to replace a seal properly. Light shifted to a blue that indicated sympathy. You are owed a debt. The mechanic. The mechanic made a mistake, Wu said quietly. He was working a double shift. He was tired. He forgot one step in a 100-step process, and my daughter died. He looked at the photo. I was angry for years. I demanded he be punished. The courts agreed with me. He lost his license, paid a fine, served time in prison. Justice was served, said. Justice was served, but my daughter was still dead, and I was still angry, so angry that I couldn't remember the happy times without feeling rage. Every good memory of her was contaminated by anger at how it ended. Wu's voice was steady, but his eyes were wet. Then one day I realized I had a choice. I could keep being angry or I could let it go, not forget, not say it was okay, just let go of the anger so I could remember her clearly. And you chose to let go, said softly. It took time, years, but yes, I forgave the mechanic, not for him, for me, so I could be free. Wu looked up at the crystal being. That's the technology, separating the memory from the emotion, keeping the lesson but releasing the pain. You can remember what the did without letting it poison every moment you exist. Was silent for a long time. His light cycled through colors humans had no names for. Finally, he settled on a warm amber. I will try, he said. It took 3 more years. 3 years of working with Wu, of practicing what humans called mindfulness, of learning to observe memories without drowning in them. But finally, in a ceremony attended by representatives from 50 species, stood before the Prime and spoke words that had never been spoken in history. We forgive the mining debt. We release you from obligation. The memory remains in our archives for historical purposes, but we will not demand payment. We choose to move forward. The Prime dimmed and brightened in shock. Why, it asked. You were owed, you had the leverage, why give it up? Because, said, we wish to discover who the can be when we are not defined by ancient grievances. This human showed us that strength is not in holding debts. Strength is in choosing to let them go. The ceremony was broadcast across the concordance. Other species watched the mighty, who had stood at the pinnacle of galactic civilization for millions of years, choose forgiveness over justice, and they began to understand. The next year, the concordance held its first Jubilee year, modeled on ancient human traditions. Every species was encouraged to forgive at least one major debt. Not required, forced forgiveness wasn't really forgiveness, but encouraged. The response shocked everyone. Within 6 months, 40% of all debts recorded in the judgment engines had been forgiven. Species that had been enemies began talking to each other without lawyers and mediators, and perfect calculations of what was owed. The engines themselves transformed. They no longer spent their processing power calculating debts. Instead, they became something new, the reconciliation network. Species could still report harms and ask for help mediating disputes, but the goal was no longer perfect mathematical balance. The goal was healing. Ambassador Maria Santos, now 60 years old and tired from a decade of diplomatic work, attended the dedication ceremony for the new network. She stood in the same viewing chamber where she had first learned about the judgment engines. But now the blue column of light was gone. In its place was something softer, warmer, a golden glow that pulsed gently. Stood beside her. Over the years they had become friends. He had learned to smile, a strange expression for a crystal being, achieved by modulating his light in specific ways. Do you know what we call you in language now? He asked. I'm afraid to ask, Maria said with a smile. The unburdened ones, because you taught us that we did not have to carry every weight forever, that we could set down our burdens and still remember why we picked them up in the first place. Maria watched the golden light pulse. Inside it, she could see streams of data, species asking for help, mediators being assigned, conflicts being resolved not through calculation but through conversation. What happens now? She asked. Now we learn, said. For 3 million years the concordance grew through accumulation. We accumulated technology, knowledge, and debts. We thought that was advancement, but you showed us a different path. Growth through release. Advancement through forgiveness. A delegate floated over to join them, the jellyfish-like being pulsed with colors that indicated contentment. The hives just forgave the colonial debt, it announced. The one from the biological contamination. They said they would rather have us as friends than as debtors. How do you feel about that? Maria asked. The pulsed thoughtfully, free. For the first time in 12,000 years, we are free to interact with the without that weight between us. It's strange but good. More delegates began arriving for the ceremony. The Cent, a delegation. The Plex Dominion arrived with gifts. Even species that had barely spoken to humanity before came to witness the moment. The ceremony began with speaking for the High Council. Today we acknowledge something our civilization failed to understand for 3 million years. We believed justice meant perfect balance, every wrong matched by a payment, every harm offset by compensation. We built machines to remember every debt and ensure nothing was forgiven, nothing was forgotten. His light brightened, but we confused memory with attachment. We confused justice with revenge. We held on to every slight, every theft, every moment of pain, and we called it righteousness. In truth, we were drowning in the weight of our own perfect memory. He turned to face Maria. Humanity came to us as a young species, weak by our measures, low in our rankings. We dismissed them as primitive, but they brought with them something we had never mastered: the technology of letting go, the practice of forgiveness, the wisdom to know that some things must be remembered but not clung to. Light shifted to the golden glow of the new network. Today, the formally stepped down from our position at the apex of the concordance. We acknowledged that we ranked ourselves highest not because we were most advanced, but because we were most wounded. We spent millions of years competing to be the most wronged, the most owed. We mistook suffering for sophistication. A murmur ran through the assembled species. This was unexpected. The had ruled the concordance's hierarchy for as long as anyone could remember. In stepping down, we step forward, continued. We join our fellow species not as creditors but as partners. We seek advancement not through accumulation of debts owed to us, but through contribution of what we can freely give. He extended a crystalline appendage toward Maria. We thank humanity for this gift, for teaching us that the most advanced technology in existence is not the ability to remember everything, but the wisdom to know what to release. Today begins a new era, an era where we measure progress not by what we accumulate, but by what we choose to let go. The ceremony continued with speeches from dozens of species. Each one shared stories of debts forgiven and relationships restored. The spoke about reconnecting with the Plex Dominion after of tension. The talked about the unexpected joy of building something new instead of repaying something old. When it was Maria's turn to speak, she kept it brief. Humanity didn't invent forgiveness, she said. We just learned it the hard way. We nearly destroyed ourselves holding onto grudges. We almost drowned in cycles of revenge. But slowly, painfully, we learned to let go. We learned that you can acknowledge harm without being controlled by it. You can remember history without being trapped in it. She looked around at the gathered species. You are all so much more advanced than us in so many ways. You can manipulate reality. You can think faster than light. You can exist in dimensions we can't even perceive. But you got stuck on this one thing, this human thing, the ability to forgive. Now you have it too. And I genuinely don't know what you'll do with it, but I'm excited to find out. Because a galaxy full of civilizations that can let go of old wounds, that can choose cooperation over calculation, that's a galaxy I want to live in. After the ceremony, Maria found herself alone in the viewing chamber. She looked at the golden glow of the Reconciliation Network and thought about the journey that had brought her here. 10 years ago, she'd been a simple ambassador, just excited to meet aliens. Now she'd helped reshape galactic civilization. Joined her, his footsteps making soft chiming sounds on the crystal floor. Are you satisfied with what you've accomplished? Maria shook her head. I didn't accomplish anything. You all did. I just showed you it was possible. That was everything, said. For 3 million years we thought perfect justice was the highest achievement. We never imagined there could be something beyond it. You showed us there was. You showed us grace. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the light pulse. In that light, Maria could see the future of the concordance. Species working together not because they had to balance debts, but because they chose to build something new. Conflicts resolved not through calculation but through understanding. A civilization held together not by chains of obligation, but by genuine connection. Will it last? Maria asked. Or will people go back to keeping score? Some will, admitted. The technology of forgiveness is like any technology. It requires practice. It requires maintenance. Some will abandon it when things get difficult, but enough have learned it now that it can spread. The knowledge exists. That's what matters. He turned to face her directly. And when people forget, when they start falling back into old patterns, there are now teachers throughout the galaxy who can remind them. Human teachers and alien ones. We've created something new, not perfect justice, but something better, imperfect grace. Maria smiled. That's a good name for it. It's a human concept, said. Grace. The idea that mercy can exist alongside justice, that you can acknowledge wrong and still choose kindness, that you can remember everything and still let it go. This is what you gave us. A young entered the chamber, barely 1,000 years old. His crystal form was bright with curiosity. Ambassador Santos, there is a delegation from the Outer Rim. They've just joined the Concordance. They're having conflicts with their neighbors and asked if a human could teach them about forgiveness. Maria laughed. Tell them Dr. Wu is available. He's better at the teaching part than I am. The young left and Maria prepared to go, but stopped her with a gentle pulse of light. Before you leave, I want to show you something. He manipulated the viewing chamber's controls. The golden light of the reconciliation network faded, replaced by a star map of the entire concordance. 7,000 species spread across half the known universe. This is how we looked 10 years ago. The map lit up with red lines. Lines connecting species who owed debts to each other, who had grievances, who were bound by obligation. The network of red was so dense that individual stars could barely be seen. 3 million years of accumulated grudges had turned the galaxy into a web of rage. Now watch, changed the display. The red lines began to fade. Not all of them, some species still held onto their debts, but enough lines disappeared that the stars began to shine through, and new lines appeared, blue ones. Lines of cooperation, friendship, freely chosen connection. This is us today, said. Still imperfect, still struggling, still learning, but free in a way we have never been before. And it's all because one species looked at our perfect system of justice and asked a simple question. What if we just let it go? Maria felt tears in her eyes. She'd spent 10 years working toward this moment, sometimes wondering if any of it mattered. Now she could see it. The galaxy was healing. Thank you, she said quietly. No, replied. Thank you. You and your species gave us the most advanced technology in existence. Not faster ships or stronger weapons or smarter computers. You gave us the ability to be free of our own past. That is a gift beyond measure. As Maria left the chamber, she passed dozens of species heading in for the next session. Mediators training in the new methods, species seeking help with conflicts, diplomats learning the human technology of reconciliation and grace. She thought about Earth, about humanity's bloody history, about all the wars and crimes and horrors her species had committed. They'd learned forgiveness the hardest way possible, by nearly destroying themselves and having to find a way back.